Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome once more to the Sunday. Chorley, Adam Lawrence, and myself, and Piotr Rusinek. And as you can see, we have a change of location. Helen is in her lovely home there. Adam's in the car, and myself and Piotr are just on our way back up to Rushden, beautiful Northamptonshire. So we should have a really interesting discussion. We've definitely got another entry from Adam from his supplement, which I'm sure we're going to go through. Plenty of doom and gloom in the markets. Let's see if Adam can put a smile on everyone's faces.
No pressure, right? No pressure. So I've kind of gone with trying to get into explaining a bit more today. Why at the moment, when you see headlines that should be really interpreted relatively positively, number one, if you're just a champion of the people, and number two, if you want your tenants to be able to pay their rents apart from anything else, you would hope that things like, for example, unemployment going down and the labour market still looking strong would be a good thing, because your average recession tends to see a lot of jobs lost and all the rest of it. But at the moment, it's a bad thing, because all it means is that rates can go up more. And really the difference, of course, compared to a normal, we've had a labour market like this for some time, where sort of sub 4% has become more of the norm. We went from sort of 8.5%, 9+% unemployment just after the financial crisis, steady trickling down steadily to about, there was a point where the great Mark Carney, bless all those who sail in him, the finest central banker to ever grace our shores, said that when things went below 6%, he'd look at increasing the interest rate. And, you know, I can't remember there ever being much commentary from the Bank of England about why they changed their mind on that front. And in long form, harking back and looking at things, it's a real shame they did change their mind on that front, because had they started to nudge the interest rate forward in sort of 2015, 2014, when we crossed that 6% barrier, we might not have been in some of the mess we're in today. But there we go. That's high. Anybody can do the job when they know the answer 5 years, 10 years later. Of course they can. Maybe not George Osborne. He probably couldn't. He probably couldn't do it. But most people could do the job when they knew the answer, right? So at the moment you see these things, and because it's accompanied by high inflation, that empowers even more strong wage demands from people, which put prices up further, which is your classic sort of wage price spiral, which is a point I was making really early on. This utter balderdash around transitory inflation was always going to be a nonsense, because as soon as prices start to move, then people want to keep up with those price movements, right? The companies want to keep up, individuals want to keep up. We haven't been able to keep up. In reality, we've had the biggest real terms pay cut on average since the financial crisis. The difference has been the level of unemployment. We haven't seen a big rise in that level of unemployment. So it's great. People are still working. It's not great if working means they've got to go to food banks and all the rest of it, which we see examples of on a regular basis. And probably you'd find some kind of happy medium between the Liberal and the Conservative position on that one, and say, well, it's tough to budget on a minimum wage salary ultimately, and there's a lot of things you can't afford, including rents, which are still rocketing forward. So we do need to bear in mind, while the world is kind of laser focused in on the interest rate, and we've got a yield curve, or we've certainly got a 5-year bond yield, which is the one that I tend to watch very closely, because that's where we set the mortgage rates from. That looks similar to what it did when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng had done their very worst. But I've spent a bit of time trying to talk about the ranges. You tend to find I'm sitting here feeling like I've been talking about this for 2.5 years, and finally the chickens have come home to roost, and this is what's happening. So I'm not really surprised by any of this, whereas the markets are still surprised, and now everyone's talking about how much worse it could get. Now, normally that's when there's blood on the streets is normally a good time to buy, right? And there's there's no blood on the streets from all of this yet, because this will have a more of a death by 1,000 cuts effect. But when you look at, I looked at 25 years of the bond yield curve, which I think is a pretty good spread, because in those 25 years we've had a dot-com bubble, we've had a great financial crisis, we've had Brexit, we've had all COVID, we've had all sorts of other things. And in reality, 4.8%, which is roughly where we've been this week and roughly where we are today, is historically quite expensive, right? Even on ignoring inflation, ignoring everything else, 4.8 is quite expensive. If you sprinkle in the inflationary parts of that period, of which there aren't many, there was some post the financial crisis, which almost dragged us into a double dip recession. It still feels like we're probably 0.5%, 0.75%, maybe 1% above where that yield should probably be, which would put mortgage rates down from the predicted sort of. I've started to look at this as what can be slightly confusing, I guess, as the pay rate, which is obviously important, plus the arrangement fee. Because if you're not counting the arrangement fee when you refinance, then you're kidding yourself about your returns, because it's a cost, and so are valuations, and so are the legals, which tend to be costing more and more because of inflation, apart from anything else. So you've got to look at the total cost of that debt, and it's a fair proxy to add on about 2% onto the 5-year bond yield. So at the moment, you'd be looking at 6.75% cost of debt. Now, I think I can go on record and say the majority, certainly over 50% of buy-to-lets in England, let's limit this to England for the moment, in England, don't yield more than 6.75% at their full value, right? So 50% of them, in my books, become relatively unviable. Now, you can make them viable by having much lower loan-to-value mortgages, but you'll find that your total returns are quite weak if you're using any leverage. Look, if they're unencumbered, they're unencumbered. And I saw a really interesting stat at a presentation at Partners in Property Manchester on Friday that was TMW do quite an extensive polling of their customers, and they said 55% intend to use a mortgage for their next purchase, which I said, that's interesting, because surely that means 45% are using cash in that case. And of course, cash buyers, I mean, there is bridging involved, but I'm going to sort of leave bridging. There's not many people that use bridging to buy buy-to-lets. We're one of them, but there aren't too many, because they don't like the negative cash flow impact of that, apart from anything else. So if 45% are using cash, the cash punters and the unencumbered are sitting there with an extremely strong position where they don't have to raise rents because of mortgage demands going upwards. But of course, they're probably going to just follow what the market is doing at the very least. And the opportunistic ones are going to push the rents anyway, regardless of how they're capitalized. But that's what you'd probably expect in any business. So although that might upset quite a few people in the generation rent side of things, it probably just it is what it is. So you've got to get your head around at the moment these, because of any positive figures, ignoring the house prices for the moment, any positive figures about the macro economy are being looked on bearishly by the bond markets, because they're saying, well, that's another reason why interest rates can go up. It's another reason why interest rates can go up. And what's actually changed quite reasonably dramatically as well is the shape of the yield curve. So normally you would see shorter term bonds be more sensitive, and it's been a funny old journey the last sort of couple of years where there's been mega volatility in very long dated bonds, and this is some of the things that happened last October, whereas the yield curve's had a bit more time to get used to all of this now, and the market's been a bit more sensible rather than knee-jerk reactions after, there was a point after the kamikaze budget where you could buy 30-year UK dated bonds at a yield of 5.1%. Now, that struck me as utterly exceptional, because 30 years is a long time, and we've got to remember that in the long term, we're facing really significant challenges to growth, right? It tends to be the case. I did a piece on this 2020, I think it was, that in pandemics, GDP tends to suffer by about 1% on average per year for 40 years following a pandemic, and perhaps a bit longer, right? So that's a really, really significant amount, especially when 1% means quite so much to where your GDP figures were. So we were kind of bumbling along at 1.5% a year growth. You lose 1% off that, you're at 0.5%. You're effectively damn near recession, or damn near the economy of Japan, which was one of Liz Truss's favourites, which tells you everything you need to know. So I've got into that in some more detail in the supplement this week. So 0.5% growth and a very difficult destination of where the benefits of that 0.5% go to, because ultimately it is going to gravitate upwards towards the top 5 or 10% of earners. It's not going to be shared out equally. You've got a problem, because you've kind of got a near Japanese problem where standards of living just stop moving. They don't really improve at all. And then you kind of, and Japan have been in this boat for 30 years, and they'd had it before they went into that boat. They'd had a phenomenal period of growth between, not long after the end of the Second World War and the end of the 80s. They were the next big threat to the US in terms of knocking them off their perch. But it wasn't quite looked at in the same way as China's ascendancy has been looked at since Japan kind of fell off the wagon in 1989. So, the Japanese economy is now looked like as a bit of a sick man. The Japanese central bank owns 56% of all government debt, which looks shaky to anybody who can see what's going on there. And the remainder is owned by, somewhat patriotic Japanese funds, institutions, pension funds, and the likes. Although there is about 15% foreign ownership of bonds, I believe, in Japan. Goodness knows why, when they've effectively controlled the returns to say, look, the 10-year bond will not return more than 0.5% a year. And that 0.5% has only been the case for about the last 6 months. It was 0.25%. And when they first introduced yield curve control in 2016, it was 0.1%. They're effectively saying there is no premium for investing in the Japanese government in the long term, which makes the UK returns look pretty exceptional. Now, of course, the one of the problems you face is, how does the currency fare? But one of the things that's happened since, when you look at Japan since the 90s, is there's been these huge drops in the value of things when you look at them in dollars, because the yen has just weakened and weakened and weakened and weakened. And we've talked before about the long-term future of sterling, and how sterling is still suffering a sort of 60, 70, 80-year hangover of not being the world's reserve currency anymore. So it has sort of trended downwards. So you've got to put all of that together and figure out, well, sterling, probably all things being equal, still gets weaker over time. And ultimately, very low growth means very low interest rates, because you can't have high interest rates and low growth. Otherwise, you have constant recession, which no political party or no central bank would want. So it has to be accompanied by a very low interest rate going forward. So even today, now what's changed in the yield curve is the 30-year and beyond bonds are a much more sensible sort of level. Although to me, they still look pretty high. If I was running a pension fund, they don't look like quite as good as they were in sort of late September, early October. But the front end of the yield curve, which is much more relevant to us, the sort of 2-year and 5-year, are ultimately where the mortgage rates are set. Well, the 2-year swap was up at 5.35 on Friday, which, by using my same logic, because the margins remain roughly the same, that puts your 2-year cost of debt at 7.35%. And I saw some 2-year products that were out there that are kind of coming in at the 5% region, but with a fixed fee of $5,000, which would probably see on your average buy to let, you're paying about 7 to 7.5% pretty much by the time you've amortized it over 2 years. And the downside of the 2-year is it still has the stress test that's not done at the pay rate. So if you're paying 5.04 on
we just got a comment from Mandy.
Oh yeah, go on.
So we just got a comment from Mandy, who said that she's an expat and she's actually, it would take her 2 years to repay the fee itself on the arrangement. So it's quite a relevant thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're looking at break evens, and the reality is, regardless of the, one of my bullet points today was we got drunk on cheap money, and that is true. But the real consequence of that was we kind of got used to cash flow out of buy-to-let. So we're unlikely to want to go back to a place where there isn't cash flow in buy-to-let. And in those situations, unless you're looking at very low mortgages or no mortgages, there'll be lots of people who are sitting there thinking, well, do you know what? Instead of, and you insert the number of properties here, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 properties with leverage, especially if they're subject to Section 24 tax, the only way I can now make this work is sell off, say, 2/3 of them and pay down all my mortgages and carry on unencumbered, which won't be the worst idea in the world, but it doesn't leverage up the returns. And anyone who's growing a portfolio using BRR or whatever, BRR's in trouble because valuations are stalling.
Yeah.
You need a massive amount more cash flow in order to take the money back out. And if you aren't putting on capital growth, which is, the likely impact of this, I've tried to explain a bit of this week as well. Prices are in a bit of a flux because on the one side, the price of borrowing is going up. That's not helpful, right? On the other side, private sector wages are up nearly 8% year on year. Well, that gives people 8% more firepower in order to go out and borrow money. And that's what drives prices forward. But there is this kind of tipping point I've talked about before around the 5.5% cost of debt mark, which was the Bank of England stress test for 10 years between 2012 and 2022 that was implemented by the PRA. So everybody's mortgages were stressed at 5.5%. And the resi rates, we're still only looking at about 5.5%, maybe 5.75%. But as we go 0.25% above that or 0.5% above that, the impact on prices is likely to be much more dramatic. So if I'm wrong and we're not really at the top of the range and we go another 0.5% up on the 5-year bond yield, then you've got a situation where you might be looking at 5 to 10% price drops in the property market. Now, I don't think it's going to happen, but my point is going 0.1% up at this stage is totally different from if the 5-year bond yield is 2.5% and it goes up 0.1, because it changes very, very little indeed. And the problem might well come if you're in a Eurozone style situation where they've gone into recession, but there's still inflation, right? And their situation is, it's almost not even worth talking about how different it isn't from the UK, because the Eurozone are down like 0.1 and 0.1, and we're up like 0.2 and 0.1 or something like that. So the difference is so infinitesimal. We're really in the same boat. But where they are is exactly what we said was going to happen. They're still putting their interest rates up, even though they're going into even though they're in recession. And they're going to have to until they control inflation. So if we did go into a recession in, say, Q3, Q4 of this year, and that's what this bunching up of the yield curve, pushing a long way upwards, it's not, people see it as a great predictor. Whereas after a while, when the difference is big enough, like it is in the US right now, it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy, because short-term debt becomes so expensive, people can't afford to service it, people go bust, and that starts a recession because the jobs get lost. And and then ultimately GDP shrinks because consumption shrinks because everybody worries. And that is the technical definition of a recession. So we've got a much bigger gap between, say, the 3-month yield and the 10-year, which is a really classic short-term indicator of a recession. And we did have a bit of a gap, like about this much, and now we've gone to kind of this much. So it really is a significant difference, and we're probably looking at within 6 months or so, maybe 9 months, looking at a technical recession. But I don't see that it looks much different to today, because the average household has already lost 3.5% of their purchasing power in real terms. So that plus I saw a video flash up just before we came on air about the Conservative Party. There's a video of them having a party at Christmas. On top of the way Boris has kind of, I don't know if you'd say deliberately, but probably deliberately kind of left the party and tried to leave Sunak with an impossible situation to solve. it does look like a lot of people who lent their votes, as it was being saying, are unlikely to lend them again in the next election. And although Labour are probably lacking the sort of push they had in 1997 with New Labour and Tony Blair and all the rest of it, they've probably got enough in the tank here to get this over the line. I saw that the polling that was a mirror of the local government elections, although the focus was on the fact that the Conservatives took a beating, it's probably worth remembering they had an 80-seat majority, so it takes a beating to swing that around. And if you mapped that sort of opinion onto the general election, you had Labour coming out with a very slim majority, which I'm sure they'll be keener to get over the line a bit more seriously than that. But regardless of what they're going to say over the next 18 months, if they have to have a pact with the Liberal Democrats or whoever realistically that it takes, I'm sure that's what they'll do to keep the Tories out. I'm sure they're going to deny that as much as they can, but pretty sure that's what will go on. So it does seem that the governmental change looks ever more certain, because the timing of the Sunak's 5 pledges, at least one of which I think is impossible in terms of stopping the small boats, which is a bad choice of language. They've started, and there's a criminal cartel behind looking to pack people on small boats for money. They're never going to stop, and you're never going to be able to stop them. Plus the other bits, well, the inflationary bit is not that impressive. If we only get inflation down to 5.5%, he's backing himself into a corner. I don't know if he's going to get out of, to be honest. So it doesn't look that good in the political landscape. So there's probably some bits to be a bit bearish about there, but in reality, let's look at the positives of the Labour government side of things. LHA will almost certainly have to be brought up, because it's a really significant problem. So anybody who does anything to do with DSS tenants, social housing, Labour are bound to pump more money into that they can get from somewhere. And what's going to happen is they're at least going to claim they can get the money by making tax changes. And if those tax changes aren't successful, well, they'll borrow the balance anyway to make up for where they want and need to be. I don't know if anybody remembers 97. They did something that was quite clever and said they wouldn't spend any more money than the Conservative Party. That's when they ended up with doing quite a lot through PFI, which is the private financing initiative, a lot of which were relatively, not the hospitals so much, but the hospitals was more of an ideological issue of the private sector making money out the NHS, which has continued, and which even Alan Milburn, who was the health secretary at the time for Blair, said, well, that's just the way it's going to be, and there's room for the private sector in the NHS, so get on with it. But that's my longest monologue of all time, I think. So I think I need to hand back over towards Helen. Jay looks like he's drinking a beer, but I think it might be a San Pellegrino.
Cheers. The bit that really kind of resonated with me is what you said, kind of about total cost, considering total cost. And it's also what Mandy referred to in her comment there, talking about it will take over 2 years to repay these fees, and making sure that you add that in when looking at your overall cost, because sometimes I think people work it out and then kind of like fudge that at the end. I think you're right. So there's a distorted view, or there's a shortage, in cash flow or whatever at the end, and that, like, how did that happen? And I see it all the time in we've lost Adam. I see it all the time in developments and looking at development analysis. And the one that always astounds me is people will quote costs before finance, and they'll use that figure to work out returns. And I'm like, that's a really pretty significant cost to be ignoring. Like, that doesn't change your return by 1 or 2%. That changes it by a whole heap more. And I have to admit, probably when I first started, and probably, when I look at my first couple of investments, maybe that number was quoted, and I didn't necessarily understand that was the number being quoted, because it wouldn't occur to me not to include one of the most significant costs in the data and in the returns. But yes, you live and you learn, and now I'm a lot wiser about that. And I still don't really understand, if I'm entirely honest, why that is quoted. I understand why you would want to look at costs before finance, because you need to know which part of your costs, even percentage wise, which part of your costs are kind of materials and that, and which is specifically related to the finance. I understand that you wouldn't want to understand that differentiation, but to use that number to work out your returns, I don't know. I'd love if someone could help me understand that more.
Well, I think like some people use it because everyone's got different cost of finance. So like the cost of finance can be quite personal. One person can
True.
get 5%, the other person might get 7%. So it could be a little bit misleading if you give people cost, including finance, because someone might get this kind of finance, someone might get different types of finance. So I think it's good to leave it for personal, like lowering your financial debt or increasing your financial debt by using the wrong number. Also,
You don't want to put the cost of finance.
Oh yeah, good.
Because when you're presenting those figures to someone that's going to invest in the deal, you almost look at that. Let's have a chat about what the finance costs are going to be, because they're going to be approaching you for the finance, right? Or for certain elements of it. So they could be cheeky and say, "Oh, this is the deal with the finance. I put the finance in at 4% and 0% arrangement," and okay, that works perfectly. And then you'll go back to them and actually say, "No, my cost of finance is 8% plus this, plus that, plus the other." So then they're basically just. I think it's a really good way to keep the deal almost like a Puritan kind of handle the deal. If you're running the deal internally and you're looking at worst case scenarios, this is what we tend to do. Looking at worst case scenarios, we'll put the finance in at like disgusting bridging rates, right? With all the bells and whistles that they try and put through onto bridging, and we model the deal based on that really. And if we can get better finance and lower costs, then that's all for the better.
Yeah, that's a bonus. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Cool.
Adam just sent us a message saying that his device just overheated. I think it might be the car thing, and he needs 10 minutes in the fridge and he'll be back.
I love that. I love that I'm in Malta and I'm cooler than you guys in the UK.
Yeah. What's there's something exciting happening in your world, right, Helen? You want to say a little bit about it?
Yeah, if you can keep that sunshine around for me for next week, that would be wonderful, please. I'm heading back to London on Tuesday because Wednesday is the Modern Woman show. Woo! It's founded by Rosie Cockshaw, and it's property women, construction women, media. It's a whole kind of cross section of kind of managerially level women, and lots of entrepreneurs as well. And it's actually the 5th year they've done it. So the dinner at night is a 5th birthday party. And we all know how I love a party. So yes, I'm really excited about that. And I'm speaking about kind of in a more general term. So not even just kind of property specific, but about raising finance, how to present your deals to potential investors. Because I work with some startups, I consult some startups as well. So it's about kind of appealing. How do you appeal to an investor? How do you kind of pitch? How do you present yourself and relate to investors? Yeah, it's gonna be a really good day. I'm really excited.
Nice. Sounds like that's a group of potentially a lot of Auction Buyers Club members, because we had this boardroom meet last Friday, and basically realized like about 60% of the people in the club are like on the board. And it's like it's more and more. Like we usually had quite a high number of women in the club, but now it's more and more. So interesting. Mention the Auction Buyers Club to them, Helen.
Okay. You will do. You will do. I'm always pushing people your way. No, it's nice though. That is what's nice about the group that you run as well. It is balanced, and yeah, it's a really nice group to be involved with. I loved it when I was part of that. Yeah.
Nice one. Yeah, we had last Friday. We had sort of like the boardroom day. We discussed like lots of things about deals, AI, or all kind of things. And then in the afternoon we had the drinks with auctioneers. That was rather what do you call it? Entertaining. We had 7 auctioneers in total with us.
Excellent. Where were the auctioneers from?
So we had a really good cross section. We had some representatives from Savills, Auction House London, Stretton's,
Network Auction.
Yeah. And then we had a contingency from Essential Information Group. So they're kind of the Right Move and Zoopla of auctions. And they were really cool. So it's kind of, we were talking for quite some time about putting a conference together for auctioneers. And I think maybe Friday was a bit of a test to see actually if we invited auctioneers to an event, would they turn up? And they did. So of the ones that we invited anyway, so it was just kind of like a small gathering. You know, we prefer quality over quantity in these situations. So 25 people-ish. It was a bit of a proof of concept. We've had messages from those auctioneers saying thank you, they had a great time. And same thing with those with the buyers club members. So I think it's kind of an emboldening thing. You know, we always say, oh, we're quite friendly with these auctioneers, and then they turn up, which is awesome. So
fab. I saw a very funny like reel or TikTok or whatever with Andrew Binstock and Bushra on social media. That was funny last time.
Andrew Binstock, they take over the event a little bit towards the end of the night. I was very entertaining.
Cool. I've not met Andrew, but he's a judge again for Property Investor Awards this year, isn't he? So I'll get to meet him when I'm back in September for our judging day, Jay.
Yes, He, I can't remember which day he's doing. I'm doing both days just because I really like seeing what people's deals look like. But he'll be there one of the days. He's a character. In fairness, most of the auctioneers have personality. You know, normally that's the biggest element. But no, he's a really good laugh. He's a really good laugh. But it was last man standing, and I'm pretty sure he was the last person to leave. He was the last person to leave the venue. He was an absolute champ.
I think you do need to have like a big personality though to stand at the front of the room and juggle all that and manage things and manage people's personalities, and knowing that there's professionals and amateurs. So it's not like you're dealing with one consistent group of people. Well, in the live auction room, I'm thinking of as well. So there's a lot of different skills you need, actually, isn't there?
There is, and it's trying to command and control the room without stifling or oppressing the room, because the idea is people to feel comfortable. You need to drive them in a direction, but you need to make sure that they're they're still going to bid. You're not going to slow that process down. And you can do that just by being very boring and putting them to sleep, or being too slow, or being too aggressive. So it is a real juggling act, and I think it's a real skill. Hopefully, it's not a skill that's dying, because a lot of doesn't seem like it's going to survive. So most are either going to stick with the eBay style or the live stream. So hopefully we'll still see a bit of that skill in the live stream environment. It'll be a shame for that to leave the market entirely.
Yeah, and there's more. I'm seeing more and more lady auctioneers as well. Sally Smith is one of the is in Property Sisters, and I saw somebody else at Stretton's as well recently, I think.
Well, there's a lady called Olivia Bolting from she's doing Auction House Southwest, which is kind of like the Devon, Cornwall / Bristol area. And I think she recently started doing the live stream auction there. She was really good, actually. Her auction went very well. It is good to see more women taking an active interest in a role like that, because auctions are quite male dominated in terms of sales, in terms of auctioneers, but it seems that the back office is normally quite a few women. If you look at the meet the team, so it's that women are wanting to step forward onto that. I mean, when I was managing, we had 3 or 4 women that were in the office. Obviously, one of them took the step to go into sales, and talking to Andrew on Friday, is doing exceptionally well, and she's got the right personality for that. She's very forward, quite boisterous, doesn't really take no for an answer. Perfect when you're trying to take lots on for auction, because she's got the right personality for it. But there were a couple of times where you'd have the conversation to see, like, is there anything more that you want to be doing? Do you want to be front and center? Do you want to be doing this, that, and the other? And a lot of people don't, and that's not just the women, but a lot of the guys that were kind of either admin or secondary sales or whatever. They didn't want to take that step. So there used to be a lady, I can't remember her name off the top of my head now, but she was an auctioneer in Wales, and she was also really very good. But I think she left auctions altogether. But it would be great to see more. It would be great to see more from like the big corporate kind of auctioneers, like Allstock, Savills, Barnard Marcus, Stretton's to a slightly lesser degree, because they all have graduate programs. These are like big, Allstock and Savills are international real estate companies. Yeah. So the fact that they don't have a female auctioneer or a female in that lead sales kind of range is I wouldn't say it's disappointing, because it's an environment where you really want to be doing it. But there must be some, top saleswomen out there that think, I can do this. It'd be great to see some of that come through sometime soon.
Yeah. Got a comment from Guy there who says, who agrees that you do need to be something of a character to be an auctioneer. And Toby had a wonderful time with you. So there you go.
Hey. Toby's just one of those guys. He's an absolute legend. He's a complete and total gentleman. And he was like, "Oh, it's my wife's birthday. I sent her shopping. I'm going to come and get the pre-drinks with you guys. I'm going to hang out. We're going to chat." And he goes, "And now I've got to find my wife and get that credit card back before she bankrupts me." So he was in top form as always. So no, it was great that he was able to come. He's always at the top of the list. Pardon?
Happy wife, happy life.
100%.
Love it. Welcome back, Adam. We missed you.
Thank you. I had the blue screen of death equivalent, the device overheating. So I thought 10 minutes in the fridge normally sorts that out. So That's rugby. It was just a sign that my 5-10 minute cliff notes on the supplement that lasted 23 minutes was too long, wasn't it? Really. So.
We loved the irony that yours is overheating in the UK. Meanwhile, I'm baking in Malta, and yeah, it seems to be okay. So
timing is everything. Timing is definitely everything. So so sorry to miss the Auction Buyers Club soiree on Friday, I must say. Yeah.
It was another comment from Guy, but Louis McDonald was successfully ran Edward Mellow's auctions for many years.
I mean, on that point, that I would say there's quite a few auctioneers that kind of owe their continued existence and success to, Auction House Scotland. You've got Mandy. I don't think the place would run really well without Mandy. You've got I forget her name, but the lady at was a previous auction company and then went on his own. She kind of moved over with him. She's brilliant. There's a lady at Stretton's who I think Andrew relies on quite heavily. So it's like Guy says, not on the rostrum, but pivotal, absolutely pivotal to the existence and ongoing success of those auctioneers. Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, you missed a Adam.
If you're around, come to our thing on Wednesday. Actually, I have a discount code for if anybody is interested in coming to Wednesday. Drop me a DM and I'll give you the discount code.
Super. I wonder if I don't know if you've already talked about it while I was in the fridge, but the thing is, there's I know there are other styles that are available, but auctioneering on the rostrum, it takes a bit of pomp and circumstance and a bit of ego, doesn't it? Really, and there's not so many women that I know that really are as brash, frankly, as some of the male auctioneers. I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, of course, when I say that, because I wouldn't want to unnecessarily ruffle any feathers. I ruffle enough deliberately, so I wouldn't want to do it unnecessarily. But they're just
friendship group. But I know loads of women like that. steer them into auction.
So you're saying it's either hanging around with the wrong women or maybe with the right women, Helen. That's what you're saying, right? Okay.
Actually, my friendship group is kind of polar. I have loads of introvert friends, and I have no idea why an introvert would want to be friends with me. But I'm actually most of my very close friends are introverts, and then on the other end, I have the beyond big personalities who I have to see in moderated doses because they make me look introvert. So I have to do and I love them all. Bless them.
All good for a fireside chat, definitely.
Yeah. Keeps life interesting.
Brilliant. I'm not sure what we finished on when you overheated yourself. Discussing something.
But I think before you overheated, you passed over to Helen, and then Helen was talking about receiving numbers for deals that were agnostic of finance costs.
Oh yeah.
And we had a little bit of a chat about
why would you not include finance costs in your calculation when you present the deal, because sometimes you don't know what someone's finance costs are going to be, right? So you kind of leave it to someone to then make those.
Yeah, Helen will have some really good insight on this point actually, because she'll see a lot more development deals than I tend to. But there does seem to be there's this kind of, like there always is, there's rules of thumb, isn't there? And there's people who are happy working to a 20% margin or 25% on cost, or however you want to sort of present that number. But some people seem to think that doesn't include financing costs. So I find that quite fascinating, because by the time let's just use a rough rule of thumb. So that often takes out about 10% or half of that margin in financing costs. So then they're working to a 10% margin on a development deal. Well, unless you're going to do the work in 4 months, is it really going to be worthwhile turning that around from end to end? I can't imagine how it would be, really, to be honest. So do you see that a lot, Helen?
And this was my question. I understand that people want to split out costs, and you want to understand what is materials, what are variable. I get that, and then you want to understand what is, what's the kind of commitment, to the bank, whether it be, normally rolled up at the end. I understand wanting to differentiate those, but I have seen returns presented as the returns before finance. Well, that number, like, who is that useful to? Because it's not useful to me, and it's really shouldn't be useful to a developer, because it's a hypothetical number. And and that's exactly what I was saying, that the significance of that cost, or not including that cost, isn't 1 or 2% change on the return. So I don't know, you make 19% instead of 20%, kind of whatever, rounding error. It's a big cost, and it can, the finance cost generally or often is what makes or breaks the deal. So how, I understand, costs before finance, I understand splitting all that out. Knock that, chop that up any way you want to, but to not include it in the returns baffles me. And I said I suspect, when I was a little more naive at the beginning, that some of the smaller initial deals that I did may have been presented that way, and I didn't quite clock it, because it wouldn't occur to me that you wouldn't include all those costs, which is exactly what you were saying about the financing as well. To not
do you think it's a bit of deal heat, or a bit of first time developer wanting to make something stack, and it's hard to find stuff that stacks up, or something like that?
I don't know. To be honest, when I've seen it before, it's almost like, oh, well, this is the way I was told it to do. There's not even necessarily like a thought process. So I don't know who's teaching that, but please stop. Because that's, that's leading to a whole heap of trouble. But again, I mean, that's concerning that wasn't questioned, and that wouldn't come up in somebody's mind presenting that as well.
I must say, of the universe grade shafters, sorry, I mean property education companies, sorry, but of the true weapons grade ones, I don't actually know mostly who teaches a lot of their development stuff. It's not a name that trips off the tongue, which means either they don't teach it because it's too hard, but I can't imagine that, because they probably want the revenue. So I know there's a couple of companies that are sort of based solely around development, from people who have at least done a number of developments, if not are still active doing them, which will be vastly superior to, one of the recent universe grade shafters, their poster boy for commercial to resi has gone down in flames in a really spectacular fashion, leaving a probable 8-figure hole behind him, which is extremely sad indeed. And it's a real shame there isn't. It possibly follows on a bit from the auctioneering conversation, because I mean, from a solely commercial perspective, if you run a big training company, do you want the person who is the best in that field, who might be willing to joint venture with you to use your platform and your marketing and all that stuff you're really good at and deliver the content? Or do you joint venture with the best salesperson you can find who can sell the most courses? And my experience has been that from a commercial perspective, they tend to go with the latter, although not solely the case. I know there's a pretty decent trainer working with one of the big companies at the moment. I'm not going to name any names, but they're not all terrible. But I don't even know who, for some of the the touch ups and that of the world, I'm not sure who does their development training, or whether they really do it. But I must say I'm quite happy to see that I don't tend to get too many of their YouTube infringements anymore. Now I pay for the premium account, I'm kind of free of that problem. So well worth the 15 quid a month or whatever it is to get away from that side of things.
So worth it to not see those
it's a bit like driving past a car crash or something, isn't it? You have to look, and you don't want to look, but you have to look. It's that weird bit of your personality that kicks in. But I think there's probably it's probably, I think it's topical, because I think there's almost inevitably like I've said there, I said earlier on, didn't I? BRR's in trouble realistically, just mathematically. it's in trouble, and it's in trouble until people can start getting deals really cheap, because you still got the kind of the zugzwang between I want the 2022 prices as a vendor, and nothing can stack up because of the cost of debt side of things. So that's going to take a few months or even a year or more to sort of arm wrestle its way out of the system. But as that happens, you've inevitably got all the new people coming into the top of all the funnels that are out there attracting, people for this sort of stuff. And if you can't really present BRR, I mean, don't get me wrong, it won't stop a lot of people still pushing BRR, but if you can't really present it in as favourable a light as you were, then development becomes potentially interesting again, because you've got a potentially falling environment for materials. You've got an environment where you might be able to negotiate a little bit harder for labour prices than you have done over the last sort of 18, 24 months, maybe. And you've got something that the cost of debt on the development side of things has not really moved up too much at all. Maybe 1% a year, which keeps it pretty keen, which is maybe only forming maybe 0.5 or 0.25% in your returns, presuming you are including finance costs, as we were just discussing. So development does look quite attractive at the moment, potentially, as long as you're quite sure on the exit side of things, as long as you're definitely delivering the right sort of stock, potentially. But I know there's lots of people who are still, lots of contractors are still pretending like it's still last year and pricing is still sort of through the roof and whatever else. But I'd imagine we're at the time of year. I was told earlier this year, because of this, I think it's Part L in the building regs that's changed around thickness of cavities and stuff like that. That's adding significant cost to getting stuff out the ground. So there was a big push to get lots of builds out of the ground before, I think it's June the 30th. I might be wrong. It's not really my area, but I think it's June the 30th. And then once they're out the ground, there should be quite a lot of sites that are either put on ice, because how else do the big house builders communicate to the government they want help to buy Mark 17 or whatever iteration of it we're on by now, right? And if they can't recover these extra, I was told by a builder they reckon about £8,000 extra cost per build, which is huge, really, when you're working to comparatively tight margins in a wobbly market. Although the figures so far suggest the new build developers have done better in curating the new build prices, but there'll be there's always a ceiling, and there's maybe they're comfortable that their marketplace is, the wages are moving upwards for their buyers in an acceptable way, and they can maybe sort of push on. But I've heard of lots of national developers pulling out of sites in the first 2 quarters of this year, which inevitably has an impact on how much labour is needed on site, which releases that labour into the general pool a bit more, which helps to ease the lack of supply. Although I haven't looked recently, but earlier on in the year they were saying there were 120,000 jobs short in the construction industry, which was not far off how short they were in the health service, which is obviously under significant constraints at the moment. So I'm sure some of that will wash out, but as we've said earlier on, the unemployment figures aren't moving too much, and in fact people are coming back into the labour market from long-term sickness and making themselves available for work again, and they seem to be finding those jobs and taking those jobs up, which is fuel to the Bank of England fire to keep ratcheting the rates up a little bit more. I guess we'll see. Are you seeing more development deals come across the desk, Helen, or is there been any kind of uptick in things being presented to you?
Not a noticeable change. I'd say about the same as usual, but certainly kind of problems with getting finance in a timely manner. So people trying to plug a gap of them needing to move forward, or them having kind of parameters on the time of things, and lenders just taking so long. I know you've experienced this on some of like your stuff as well, but just taking so long that people are looking elsewhere for private money.
We've completed a deal on Friday at a slightly higher interest rate than we would have been at if we stuck with a vanilla lender. But it was the timeliness of it, and the unreliability of the lender. You know, the lender found a really thin excuse of a way to get out of lending us the money at the agreed rate around the turn of the year, and we'd already been in that process for 6 months, and it's kind of like, oh, we were 6 months in, and now you're going to torch the rate on us, and it's kind of like, well, we just can't. There's a trust problem, and I think we've seen some of that in some of the lenders who they have taken a long time, but they've been clear that they're still going to complete. If they don't, it would be a problem, because it'd be someone else sort of scratched off the list to a large extent, or certainly we have to have a long memory in these situations. It's not sort of revenge and vindictiveness. It's kind of like, well, who can I rely on to get this over the line? And if the deal can support it, well, do you know what? If the finance costs are maybe 10 or 15% higher than we thought they might be, so, you know, we're going from 6 to 7, let's say, so it's about 15% difference, isn't it? If we are, but the deal supports it, and we know we're going to get it, and we know we're going to get it in a timely fashion. I mean, this particular individual was an absolute dream to deal with. He was dead clear on what he wanted, dead clear on what the parameters were, and when it came to sending the money, bish bash bosh, there it was in the solicitor's account. Now, not every private investor works like that, and I'm sure many who've worked with lots of private investors will attest to that side of it. But this comes down to the due diligence side and working with the right people, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like the cost or the premium of that certainty over, well, you know, you are going to get it slightly cheaper, but you're not sure when or if, like you say, or if the goalposts are going to get changed. Like we had a lot of that during and after actually lockdown, didn't we? I know I like several examples of where lenders had lent. The deal was exchanged, and then they pulled the deal. They didn't even just change the rate; they pulled the deal entirely. How do you do that to somebody?
That's just awful. I mean, that's just awful. That's so unethical. It's unbelievable. I mean, we had a really, really interesting deal that we actually concluded just before the tax year ended last year. So concluded sort of 1st of April or 31st of March or something like that. And we basically had our negotiation kind of centered around what we thought the valuation was going to be of this property. So these guys were pretty good to deal with as vendors, because they were realistic. They had money. They're well moneyed, very well capitalized. They just wanted a fair price and a reasonable price, but they understood they needed to leave something on the table in order to make it a good deal. So really good to deal with. And when the valuation came through, and to be honest, the valuation was above what I thought it was going to be, and it was well above what they thought it was going to be. But the first thing the guy did is he picked up the phone to me, because even though it was our valuation, he knew the valuer, so I knew he was going to find out what the number was, right? And he picked up the phone. He said, "Oh, you've had a great valuation, haven't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm really pleased with that. I'm a bit surprised, to be honest, but you know, it's very rare that I'm surprised on the upside, but it's one of those times." And he said, "Well, I just wanted to say good luck to you, and I'm really pleased for you, because this means you're much more likely to complete the deal, because now you know you're getting even more." And I just thought, what a brilliant mindset to have as a vendor to get something over the line. That's the answer. And you mentioned, I think, Helen, probably the key word, and probably the word of the last 6 months and the next 18 months in property, I think, certainty, because there is always a price on that certainty. And obviously that's one of the things that Piotr and Jay deal with on a day-to-day basis, is don't underprice certainty in auction, because the timescale just work in a world where timescales have slipped and everyone's kind of gone, oh well, it's all a bit slow because of COVID / insert next excuse here. The auction process hasn't gone from 28-day typical to 56-day because everyone's a bit slower. They'd say, no, it's 20 working days or whatever it is. And if anything, you know, you can obviously put stuff in and have a shorter time frame to completion, which should give you more certainty, because you're probably pricing out anybody other than a cash buyer, because most people won't even trust a bridging company for a 10-day completion.
Yeah, from there, like the Auction Buyers Club boardroom. So now it's boardroom, like people are saying that they see a lot of deals, but they do have money stuck in this deal or that deal, and they don't have the cash readily available. And right now, I think people who have cash, or people who have investors willing to lend the money, auctions like auctions are for people who really need to sell today. Like that's their priority. It's not the price. Like they would love a good price, but it's like it's the transaction happening today that's of priority to them. And I think yeah, cash. It's a good time.
Yeah,
We have
and
a couple of buyers looking at.
Go on, Jay.
We've got a couple of buyers that are looking at stock that's being sold by either receivers or mortgagees in possession. And traditionally, those are 14-day completions, and that's 14 whole days. Doesn't matter if there's a bank holiday, doesn't matter if it runs over a weekend. That's 14 whole days, and for the most part, those contracts exclude the 10-day grace, the notice period if you fail to complete on time. Which means realistically you have 2 whole weeks to complete on that transaction. That wipes out a lot of people looking to buy something like that. So you see those deals, and if you are flushed with a bit of cash, or you have
we lost your audio at the denouement there, my friend.
We did.
Where did you last hear me?
Flush with a bit of cash.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's always the best part. If you're flush with a bit of cash, or you have investors that you've worked with over a period of time, and they're comfortable with you and they're happy that you can perform, then you're going to pick quite a few people to the post, because the 14 days in and of itself is it's a deterrent from time wasters. And you know, for the mortgagees in possession and the people they're repossessing, and for people in bankruptcy, for the receivers, okay, you're getting rid of the time wasters, which is good, and you're getting qualified buyers, which is good, but you're sacrificing on price. But those transactions are tricky because of the timeline. And because of the need for expedient completion and cash availability, but it's also because those properties are sold with no guarantees, no warranties. That's limited title guarantee. There are, you know, if there is a tenant in there, good luck.
You know, it's interesting.
So, you know, you're picking up.
It's interesting you say it, because we did one. We don't.
Yeah, you're picking up something cheap.
Yeah, we don't buy too much of that stuff as a rule, but we did do 3 houses last year in one job lot that were kind of a newish development. So you could see the benefits in holding for the long term, because your longer term maintenance should be pretty low, hopefully. And it was absolutely typical. All of that, as you said. I think there was maybe a 5-day notice period instead of none. But I know none is becoming more common. But we managed. We didn't have a problem with doing it in the 10 days. And there was a genuine sort of 25% discount there. One of them was a nice one because it was a bigger property, and you could add the extra bedroom, the oldest trick in the book. You know, that was vacant, and that was easy enough to do. Been revalued, no problem. One of them, elderly tenant in there. Didn't like it was going to cause any trouble. One of them we couldn't get any access to beforehand, and ended up having the tenant from hell in there. One of the worst we've ever had. Bad mental health situation, threatening my tenancy manager. Really, really ropey all around. According to her, was going to be able to stop the bailiffs on the do, because very rarely do we ever get to bailiffs, because understanding the bailiffs are coming is normally enough for most people to go. You know, but this one went to bailiffs. And she was, according to her, on the morning, still sending abusive messages to my tenancy manager, saying that she was going to get a stay of execution and whatever. It didn't look very likely to me, and she didn't get that stay of execution. She was evicted accordingly. But that's exactly the sort of thing the receivers are there to do. So, you know, arguably for the first 2 houses we've had a bargain. For the third one, we've had a situation to deal with that we've probably. You know, we're certainly not going to make a 25% margin on it. We're going to make maybe more like a 15% margin on it, which is, I know, don't cry for me, Argentina and all the rest of it. But that's what you get into when you get into those situations. You just got to be able to handle it and to just sort of get on with it, really, which is a real shame. But you can see I mean, I'm seeing on Friday, I had a couple of things sent over to me, which were suddenly, they're on the market at sort of 140, 150. We were told we could have them for 100 before. I think it might have been 110 actually, and I didn't think there was enough margin in the deal because they were on the market at yesterday's price, not today's price. And then message came through on Friday. You can have them for 70k each. Just suddenly like that, boom, bang, it dropped like that, and it's like that just shows you where someone needs the money, and that's very, very rare that we would see something quite as dramatic as that. So I think next week. Next week might be quite interesting in terms of, because there's still been a lot of, I mean, obviously we still don't know the rate's going to go up 0.5%, although it looks the most likely outcome to me now at this point. But if it goes 0.5% on top of where we're starting from, you might see some certainty being required by a few people, because people who are tied to base or tied to Sonia at the moment, it's not great timing for them. Not great timing. Let's see.
Brilliant. Got a couple of comments. One, both from Guy, Adam, and no other cost generally with private lenders. So that's with a few points.
I think he probably means worth a few points, in which case I strongly agree. Yeah, absolutely, Guy.
Yeah. I do, and it's why I go on and on about keep your existing investors happy. Don't make life hard for yourself. You have certainty. If you keep those investors happy, you have certainty, because as soon as they have cash, they'll go to you again, because they don't want to go around trying to find new deals, new peoples, build trust either. Keep your existing investors happy, honestly.
Yeah. Another good comment from Guy there as well. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, Guy. I don't know if you see this regularly by looking at what other auction. I don't know how closely you follow what the other auctioneers are doing, but I'm always surprised by auction houses that don't do the best thing for their clients in some of these situations. Wow. All sorts of, from poor lot positioning to poor presentation of the facts to not really even investigating the facts in the right way in the first place. I just, and of course that's where, on my side of the fence, that's where opportunity knocks, right? Because if I can see it and it hasn't been presented in the blurb or by the auctioneer, I'm maybe the only person who's seen that angle, and that's where profit lives ultimately. But I do feel sometimes it is a bit of whether it's the fact that sometimes the people who are onboarding are not particularly experienced enough to see the angles to really know what the investors want. I think there's a lot of value in understanding what your audience wants, and that's a really good example of it. That 6-week completion gives them that time to do what they might need to do.
Yeah. Brilliant, guys. For 10:13, we need to run. We've got still a few miles to do, and there's really good discussions. Thanks for comments from Guy and Mandy, James, and all the others who left the comments. And we'll see you guys on next week.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Happy Father's Day.
Have a great day.
Cheers,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Happy
Bye, everyone.
Father's Day.